So, welcome to the session around embracing difference today. And I'm very grateful to Sarah for making time for our dialogue. So, Sarah and I met whilst we were on some systemic training. And actually, Sarah gave me an incredible experience, which I will always stay with me as well. And for those who haven't met Sarah Lane before, so Sarah's an executive coach, a facilitator, um, and you can see two of her books behind her. I have my copy of one of them here, actually, which is going to be the focus of our conversation today. So, Sarah, what would you like to say to the group?
I'd probably say that half an hour I will do my best to stay on point. As an ADHDer, I will be going off in all sorts of tangential directions internally in terms of my process, but I will do my best for the half an hour to stay on point. But in any given moment, I've put a note in the chat to say if we don't get to some of the questions that gets answered, I'm always really happy. Just email over and I'll happily do my best to respond. But apart from that, I think you've captured it. 20 years as an independent coach, having a background in a previous life qualifying as an accountant at a military school, but latterly finding what I was put on the planet for. So working in organisational psychology. So um, everywhere from foremost companies for fair trade and all the stops in between. So yeah, love what I do with team coaching and exec coaching.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you. Um, so, I mean, it's a broad topic, and I know we're gonna. I want to hear from you about your own experience first of all, and then I know we're both holding an intention to make this practical in terms of some real practical ideas that the coaches listening can take away from our dialogue today.
Yeah.
Um, so I do want to start with your book, which is going to be the focus of our conversation in this initially. So, um, how about you start with just sharing what led you to write the book?
So there are a couple of things really that really fired me up to want to put something in print around the topic. And it very much comes from the lens of gender and neurodivergence, but not because I've ranked them as a priority, but they're my lived experience. And so, therefore, both of the books I've written have come from personal experience. They're full of stories as well as research and practical kind of exercises. And this one, um, as many listening may well be friends of or send parents themselves with children with special educational needs. And most of us have had to fight to the point of tribunal to get our children to access education. And it was that fight that really opened my eyes to the lack of systemic awareness of what actually might make a difference in our day-to-day way of operating. So it really drove me. I was either going to march on Westminster or I was going to write a book. And my coach asked me some great questions when I came out of the fight mode around where my energy needed to be. And I realized that my energy, having spent 2 years very much externally fighting the system, needed to be with my husband and my son. So that's what maybe put my thoughts and ideas into the book rather than marching on Westminster.
Wonderful. Well, and you know, thinking about our current context, what are your thoughts around why this feels even more important actually for us as coaches?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So the thing that really comes to light, I think, when you start really systemically looking at this, is there are so many of us that are late diagnoses, parents of children with neurodivergence. And because for the majority it's genetic, you start going, oh. And what that means in our workplace settings is there are more and more leaders and people in teams more broadly who, well, it's 1 in 7, isn't it, from more recent statistics, that will have some form of neurodivergence. So layer that in on top of other inequalities that are often within organizational settings, not always. Many are doing much better these days. Um, and it for me raises the prevalence, because without great places to offer value and be on purpose and do our work, then what do we do next? Yeah. So
Mm.
even greater importance in our workplaces, I believe.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Um, and I suppose from your lived experience, what do you notice? And let's go to sort of a bit of a focus now in terms of what coaches, well, maybe wider with HR professionals as well. What might they misunderstand in terms of working with neurodivergence in a client or perhaps a colleague or
There's two things that come to mind, and I'll do my best to remember both. So the first one is what I notice in many of the organizations that I work with is at the visionary, strategic leadership intention level, there is often a real desire to be inclusive. It's when you then look at the behaviors that go down through the organization when you get to those who are operating in the day to day. So, applying HR policies, for instance, where unless you are in an open feedback learning environment in terms of culture, application just doesn't happen. So that sense of flexibility doesn't exist. Down to I was coaching a current coachee actually, who's a maternity returner, who has autism and ADHD. One of her big challenges that runs is that she has an electric vehicle. Her organisation, while she's been off, has made it so that it's compulsory to be in the office between 2 and 3 days each week. The range on her vehicle will get her there, but she has to charge it to then be able to get home again. And because of the way her brain operates, unless when she gets there she can plug it in, every meeting she's in or every piece of work she's trying to do before she manages to plug it in will be running at 50% power, because half of her brain's taken up concerned running a script around how do I get home.
mm,
So at a policy level, there's inclusivity there where there's the possibility they've got EV chargers in their car park. It's all possible. Um, but understandably, for her, it didn't feel safe to take the mask off and talk to the facilities manager about what she needed, because there was, she didn't want to be deemed to be special or stand out.
mm,
So the work we were doing was how do we have those types of conversations and find the safe place, whether that's with someone in HR to talk about it, with somebody that gets it, that you're not asking for anything other than a reasonable adjustment. And it could well be better for most people if you put a rota system in, or a process that means that, as you would with a physical disability, you would have car parking nearer the front door and there'd be ramps and drop curves to help wheelchairs get into the building. It's finding a way to think creatively and differently, so it's better for all.
mm,
So that's one thing I noticed. So the strategic and then the operational, there's often a gap, depending on the
mm.
culture of the organisation. And I must admit now I need you to re-ask me the question so I can remember the
Well,
second one.
it was around, yeah, it was just about from your lived experience, what you noticed. So you're speaking more about the HR and the organizational level in terms of what they may misunderstand about, working or supporting people who are
Right.
neurodiverse.
Thank you. So that's a perfect example. So I'm really comfortable with naming my neurodivergence. So I'm very happy to go, Damion, could you do that again? Because I went off on 12 stories in my head and I need you to pull me back. That's not possible for everybody, and for all sorts of different reasons. And so one of the things that I'd say, particularly if you're coaching in an organizational setting, is if you maintain the fundamentals of coaching around being client led, about building trust and rapport, and being non directive, then you'll be doing all right. And at the same time, what I would encourage is to notice any assumptions you might be bringing, because there is the fact that it's worth renaming that every neurotype an individual is different. And within neurodivergence, if you've met one autistic person, you've met one. Everybody is different and has different needs. Oh, there's some commonalities, sure. Um, and it's about checking your own assumptions you might be running.
Mm. Well, and I know from my time when I met you and the time that we've shared, I've always appreciated you naming, your experience or your what you needed, or and I suppose I'm reflecting on your earlier answer as well, and just thinking about this whole premise of safety for the person to be able to express that, and of course, as coaches, we try and create psychological safety. But again, I'm really noticing that I'm appreciating you taking coaches back to the basics, because I suppose often, um, in my experience, coaches, especially when they're learning to be coaches, often think they need to be an expert around neurodivergence. So let's go and read everything I can around autism. And I think that's useful, but I'm yeah, I really appreciated that reflection from you
Yeah,
there.
and, it's really important, and that doesn't diminish, like you say, doing specialist trainings, because do they give you a helpful lens? Sure. Like the work that they do at the ADHD Coaching Academy, for instance, their coaching program is brilliant if ADHD is something you'd like to become more informed about in your coaching. And at the same time, stick to those fundamental principles, and you genuinely won't go far wrong.
Mm. So let's just funnel down a little bit more. Um, so if people listening, because this is a short bite-sized reflection, and again, I'd really recommend this as well. But if there's one practical takeaway from today that may shift a conversation they were having with a client, what would you say?
I'm going to be greedy and offer two if I can.
Oh, that's even better. I went
I
for
said,
one because I was thinking, oh, just one, but two's great.
let's do it. Let's go for it. So defining what done means, I think, is a really define the done. And what I mean by that is if you're a coach working with an individual, or actually in an organizational setting in the HR team, making the implicit explicit is really important because it stops all of the internal dialogue or the making up that we do and all the stories. Um, and so an example of that might be if you were to say to your coaching client before you have your first session to prepare for the session, to do some thinking about what you want to get out of the coaching. That seems quite reasonable, right? And yet, if you have someone with a neurodivergence, that doesn't tell me how much you expect me to do. Do you want me to show up with it written down? Do you want me to email it to you beforehand? Is it going to get judged? There's all sorts of different hairs that would start running on that. So by being able to name that all I need is thinking, you don't need to send me anything beforehand. At the first session, we will really contract on what that means. So maybe think about the type of environment you would like, whether cameras on, cameras off, or would you like some in person where we're going to go for a walk? What will meet your sensory needs to make the environment right for you? Think about a 6 month period, and at the end of the 6 months, what are the kind of things you would notice in yourself that let you know it's been useful? So be really explicit, and they're just a couple of examples. Obviously, you wouldn't do that with everybody, but be really explicit about what is your expectation on preparation, because that then really calms the nervous system. Because we're talking about nervous system responses here, not just head rational thought. Um, and I'd say the second one is for those of us, because there are many of us, whether you're neurodiverse or no, that might have grown up in a household with a look to listen rule. So I don't know if you're familiar with the old look to listen rule. I'm sure you are. But it's that if you grew up in a household where one or other of the key caregivers said something along the lines of, look at me when I'm talking to you, then you don't believe people are actually listening unless they're looking at you at a very unconscious level. And whether you're neurodivergent or no, some people didn't grow up in households with that rule, so they just don't. But certainly for most of us with a neurodivergence, it makes it harder if I've got to look at you. So being explicit again about the need to drop eye contact. So naming that actually, during our sessions, some people find that looking out the window can be a really useful way of thinking more broadly. So if that's something you'd like to do, great. If we need to take 5 minute breaks to turn the camera off, then we can do that too. Or we could go on a virtual walk together and just be old school on the phone. So it's allowing and normalizing not needing eye contact. That can be really helpful.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. And the coaches who are listening who train with us will be very familiar with our focus around the importance of the relationship and the contracting that goes on. But I'm really appreciating this sort of this other lens that you're bringing in terms of whether that's permission giving, the normalizing, as you're saying, but even being very clear around the expectation and what and why and what that I suppose the importance of that. It's really, really useful. Thank you. I'm just going to say to the group, if there are other questions that are sparking for you and you want to put them in the chat panel, please feel free. But I suppose let's just talk a little bit more about the relationship then,
Sure.
because you said earlier about the fundamentals and needing humanistic sort of orientation in terms of the relationship. What would you say coaches can really do to create a space for the other person to, as you're doing, to feel safe enough to be able to really name, to unmask in terms of their neurodivergence?
I'm not sure there is one thing, to be
Mm,
honest. I guess coming into the and we won't always know, the person might not even know they've got a neurodivergence. Talking of late diagnoses, there are many of us wandering around for years that haven't got a clue. They think everybody else has got the same challenges going on as they have. So I suppose it's dialing up the checking yourself and making sure your inner stance is one that is boundaried, grounded, and open. So know that co-regulation is something that often is something that's required, um, particularly in coaching conversations, because they're going to be, if we're getting to the guts of stuff, they're not easy conversations, are they? So there's something in there about knowing that there may be some nervous system response that actually co-regulating is going to be even more important. So as much as it's important for us professionally to be in that grounded, calm place and clean as we can be going into conversations, knowing that we're human too, so we'll have our backdrop of other stuff going on. Know that most people with some form of different wiring, we pick up the vibes much quicker.
mm,
And if we can't make sense of it, it is really dysregulating. So
mm,
if there is something going on and you've already got a relationship, naming it can actually be really helpful because I'll already know you're a bit off. So me
mm,
then knowing that you're a bit off because I don't know, your son's off school because he's been throwing up all night, that means I can go, okay, right, I know what that's about. And it's because otherwise I'll be thinking, what for done, what for said? Are we not doing this
mm.
right? Or some other story that I might be making up.
Yeah, and again, in a way, the coach is role modeling naming, aren't they? And
Yeah.
giving permission to the coachee to do the same.
It's making that
Um,
implicit explicit again.
Lovely, lovely. So, Sarah, would it be okay if I bring in some questions
Yeah,
for
do.
you? Okay, so I really want to sort of maximize your expertise as we've got you. So, I'm just going to put my glasses on
Oh, he
just so I
means
can.
business now. He's got
I
his
do,
glasses on.
I
Watch
do.
out.
Um, what strengths do neurodivergent coaches bring to neurotypical folk? It's an interesting
Oh,
question.
it is an interesting question.
Mm,
And again, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because it depends on both the neurodivergent coach and the neurodivergent folk. But if I were being allowed to generalize, which I'm going to give myself permission for, do rein me back in if I've gone too far down that generalization route, though. I would say tangential thinking, being able to spot things that aren't obvious, and a relentless desire to be in it. They're probably common themes I would notice for people who have chosen to be coaches and have done the training and have got the experience. There's some common themes I notice in the neurodivergent coaches that I've come across. And I guess the really practical thing that if I think about a lot of the neurotypical leaders that I work with, they'll quite often use me as a sounding board to test out how would this go? Because
Mm.
there's a real fear there of getting it wrong and doing damage or whatever might be running for them. So it's like being that sounding board and that tester, if you like, as to if I suggest this, is that a good idea? Or I just did that yesterday. How bad's that? So
Um,
there are a couple.
love it. Thank you. Thank you. Um, I mean, an interesting reflection from David here. Just any thoughts on difference between ADHD coaching versus coaching someone with ADHD?
I'm not sure I understand that. I'm going to find it in the chat because sometimes reading it,
Yeah,
I struggle
please.
to take it in. So, any thoughts on difference between ADHD coaching versus coaching someone? I don't really understand. Could you help me understand it a bit better?
Well, I may be off track here, but I wonder whether if you've got someone who's been diagnosed with ADHD and as part of the diagnosis is having coaching versus someone, so it's specifically around ADHD, I imagine.
No, oh, well, I get that, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
bit I don't really
Versus
understand is
working with a
what's the difference
client
between
and
ADHD coaching and here we go,
he's
specialist
saying
ADHD
specialist
coaches.
ADHD
Oh, I
coaching. Yeah,
see. Okay, thank you, David.
yeah.
Um, in all ports, I have come across the good, the bad, the ugly. So I begin with that life experience of even those that are ICF accredited or whatever, there are some that I would go, they are a master at what they do, and others that I go, oh, okay, really? Bit of a question mark.
Mm,
Um, Less so these days because it's more rigorous. Um, but with the ADHD coaches, where you've done some form of coach training that is specific to ADHD, when it's done well with a good organization that is science based, then what I notice is there seems to be more of an ability to put a lens of possibility because you have a greater awareness of the journey that individual might have gone through to get to diagnosis. So, for instance, you might know things like it's highly probable post diagnosis for somebody with ADHD to go through a grief process. So there's a relief. Oh, that's why. I'm not just broken. That's why that happens that way. But alongside that relief is a grief of what might have been, particularly for those that are late diagnosed. So if you're an ADHD informed coach, there's some specific things along the journey that you probably have a higher awareness of than a coach that hasn't had ADHD informed training.
mm,
But as I said earlier, if you're non-directive and you apply those coaching fundamentals of client-led and building trust and rapport, then you won't go far wrong.
mm. Thank you.
Does that
Uh,
help, David? I
yeah,
hope, hopefully. Oh,
yeah,
great.
it's
There
brilliant.
we
Thank
go.
you. Yeah. And I'll bring Claire's question in actually, because again, it's picking up on some of the key pieces there around being non-directive. She's put, how as coaches can we ask broad, open questions to neurodiverse clients who may struggle with open questions?
I'm interested about the struggle with open questions. I don't
Mm,
experience that
mm,
struggle. If it's, oh gosh, when I had my ADHD diagnosis, it wasn't great. The clinician, luckily, I had a friend of mine who was my informant in the room, and she's a coach, and she was able to bring us back on track. Um, she had a really bad practice of asking more than one question, which is bad anyway, right? Ask a question, stop. And she wasn't. And that completely, I couldn't do that. Um, but that's different from an open question, right? Uh, so as long as I don't know, if I get a sense that someone's asking an open question, but it's loaded, I'm gonna know, and that's not gonna go well. Um, but if you're a good coach that's come into it clean and you're asking an open question from a place of curiosity, I can't see that being a problem. Unless there is a specific example that maybe Claire's got that maybe would
Mm.
help me understand a bit more of the root underneath the question.
Let's see, Claire, if there's anything you want to add to that, please feel free
No,
to bring
do, because I'd love to understand more to be able to offer some other thoughts, which of course are not the whole truth, nothing but the truth. They're just my opinion.
it. But the ongoing check-in with the client as well, in terms of creating that space to check in around the impact the coaching's having, what they're
Yeah.
valuing, what's challenging for the.
Yeah, and it's that constant
Hey.
contracting. I think as long as you're like the fundamentals are in place and you have a really explicit contract that's really clear
Mm,
with set timeframes, then you've got that safe basket to work within. Then you can ask as many open questions as you like. If it's without that holding zone, then that would become overwhelming.
mm,
But as long as you've contracted well, it's fine.
thank you. So apart from obviously your book, and I just wonder what other resources you're aware of that might be useful for coaches to go to if they're interested more in this topic.
Well, the one I would highly recommend is to look at Seed Talks, who are through Eventbrite. They do all sorts of different. I don't recommend all of them. I'm not into psychedelics, for instance, but they do lots of talks that are on edge of research type topics. And as much as neurodivergence is becoming much more mainstream and more people are talking about it and understanding it, they began like 3 or 4 years ago with a lot of programs, courses for both coaches and general public to learn, and they're low cost. But every single person I've seen as the online lecturer, or even at the the summits I've been to that are in person, they are science based. It's not like TikTok City where they're chucking out if you walk into the shower backwards, you must have ADHD. Now, come on, get a grip. It's like so the people that are on there are really credible.
Lovely, lovely. Thank you, Sarah. Um,
Oh,
and
that's interesting. Claire, sorry, Claire's
oh,
expanded, but we can go there in a minute.
yeah.
What were you going to ask?
No, 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 no. Well, I'm conscious of time, so why don't
Mm,
you go to what Claire's written?
I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, well, it's fine. I'm going to read it as well.
Oh yeah, my son is similar actually, Claire. That so for those that aren't reading the chat, talking about an autistic child that struggles with what, how types of questions, finds them too broad, and closes down as she finds more closed questions easier to process. My son is the same. If he's given too much choice, it becomes dysregulating for sure. And I notice that's really common with children. Um, what I do notice though is post 25 or most of the leaders I work with, certainly. So adults that have found their way into organizational settings, I would say, is the group of people I work with. It's less prevalent, but that's probably because of years of practice and strategies for how to regulate. But I hear you loud and clear, Claire, that certainly with children, my son included, um, it making it too big causes immediate feedback that this is not okay.
Hmm. Thank you. Well, Sarah, I'm conscious of your time. So really, really,
Sorry, I'm
no,
off.
don't worry, don't worry. I really appreciate you making this time. So just final question from me, and then we'll look to close down. But just, I know it's pretty open, but just anything else you want to say as a way of just closing today's reflection down with me. Um,
I would say if I'm coming from a place of folks on the call being either very well trained coaches or HR professionals, then trust your gut. And as long as you're in that client led, clean space, trust what comes and know that if you get it wrong, it can be repaired. It's okay. We're all going to get it wrong.
Lovely. Thank you. And I really appreciate the way you brought the human element to this in terms of, you know, what's really at the core of how we hold and work with people as coaches. So I'm really grateful for that,
Right,
Sarah.
absolute pleasure. And as I said earlier in the chat, if some of the questions I haven't, or the responses that I haven't quite got to, if anyone wants to chat, whether it's about our kids, because I'm all there for, I might not have what charged on Westminster, but whenever there's another parent with kids that are similar to mine, I'm all ears, and in whatever way I can help, I'm there. And in the organisational settings, taking that systemic view, but being practical with it, figuring out day to day what you can do is kind of key. But my email's in there, so do drop me an email and I'll happily support wherever I can add value.